Hello and welcome to Smaulgld. In case you missed it, top gold and silver stories for the week ended May 28th, 2017. Bitcoin overtakes gold in search interest, and Ethereum tops silver. Bitcoin, Ethereum, gold, and silver prices all rise. There's been more Comey, FBI, CIA, Trump, and Russia turmoil. Fed mentions in its minutes to reduce its balance sheet by not reinvesting principal on its securities, and Indian gold and silver tax may impact gold and silver demand in that country. Let's take a look at the top stories. So, the Russian interference in the U.S. election continues. We're going to explain why that's relevant. So, former CIA Director Brennan testified to Congress during the week, and when pressed on evidence of any Russian collusion, he said, this is a quote, "I don't do evidence." Let's take a quick look at that here.
Evidence of a connection between the Trump campaign and Russian state actors.
As I said, Mr. Gowdy, I don't do evidence.
Okay, I don't do evidence. Okay, so during the week, it was announced that the Comey memos, also the ones that supposedly document former FBI Director James Comey's conversations with Donald Trump, would not be released. So there's a pattern here. We get the information out there, leaked out there, that there are these memos, that there's some potential evidence that Donald Trump tried to obstruct justice with James Comey, and then you don't get to see the memos. It was also reported that by CNN that James Comey acted on Russian intelligence he knew to be false. So it seems that Comey's entire period as FBI director, but since he announced his findings on Hillary Clinton, have been more about influencing politics than just doing straightforward investigation and presenting those findings to the Justice Department. He seems to take center stage with his press conferences and then his letters to Congress, and now supposedly an associate of his leaked a memo to the press that Comey supposedly had written a number of memos in his conversations with Donald Trump, but then you don't get to see the memo. So this plays out in people's minds rather than in the judicial system, the court system, through the investigatory process. So the result of all this has been the plan to undermine Trump has been having been elected illegitimately is having a destabilizing impact on his presidency. However, in addition, while weakening the president politically with this incessant Russian collusion narrative, which has been driven by a flood of leaks and innuendo coming from intelligence agency, that also weakens the mainstream media credibility and the government institutions like the FBI and the CIA. So the combined impact of that is you've got the presidential branch has been tainted by the other branches' attempts to sully it, but in doing so, they're sullying their own reputations by not just producing the evidence and letting it flow through the judicial system. Instead, they're letting it run through the mainstream media, the public opinion, so that on the one hand, it does work in undermining the president's credibility, legitimacy, however you want to describe it, but it also undermines their own credibility. And I think that is having an impact on confidence in the US dollar. Now, if you remember, or you don't have to remember, if you've read about Nixon, when he resigned, there was a general consensus that the system worked. Nixon made mistakes that obstructed justice. But in this case, it appears the system isn't operating on this rule of law, but rather by innuendos, leaks, fake news, retractions. But you see, when fake news goes out into the media, from the media, and I'm talking about when they claim, for example, there's this Russian dossier. When they report on that, the damage is done, even though it turns out not to be true. That seems to be the MO nowadays, is to just get information out there and undermine your political opponents, irrespective of whether the information is true. Now, you can expect that from media because they're biased, but you shouldn't expect it from the intelligence agencies to be leaking information to the media in order to concoct these stories. So then you combine that dynamic with the president, who's more than willing to fight his case on Twitter. And you get a growing lack of confidence because you see this type of mayhem, this circus mentality, where the supposed deep state, and that's another issue, is supposedly trying to take the president down, and the president is supposedly, he's not supposedly, but he's out there battling all this, and it appears to be a distraction from what should be the business of the president, which is acting as the executive, not constantly responding to media stories. And there's your dollar index. You can see since Trump's inauguration, you had a little spike over 103. Actually, Trump was inaugurated in mid-February, the 21st, around here, but the dollar has dropped since he's been in office. Now, the second big story: cryptocurrency soar, plummet, and soar. I did a quick Google search on interest in Bitcoin, Ethereum, gold, and silver, and the search I looked for was buy those particular assets. And you can see, so I did it back to April 25th. And if you wanted to buy gold, you did that search. That was the highest search up until the early part of about May 21st, when buy Bitcoin soared past the search results or the search queries for buy gold. Now, if you look at buy silver, silver was always behind Bitcoin during the week and stayed behind Bitcoin, but Ethereum surged ahead of silver in search results, or it's not search results, in search inquiries by May 22nd, which shows that the interest in cryptocurrencies really has skyrocketed along. As the price went up, people became more interested in buy those coins, as evidenced by their search activity. Now, I also did how to buy these particular items. Now, a lot of people already know how to buy gold and silver. They may not know how to buy Bitcoin. Well, there you can see that how to buy Bitcoin way up here, how to buy Ethereum above gold and silver. Now, before that, Ethereum was below the others, but how to buy them is even more of an increase because people not only interested in buying them, that interest surged, but people trying to figure out how to buy them. So more people want to know how to buy Ethereum and how to buy Bitcoin than want to know how to buy gold and silver, at least as evidenced by the search results. That doesn't mean there's more people interested in buying those assets. However, it may mean here where you just have buy that more people, at least in the past week, were interested in buying Ethereum and Bitcoin than they were gold and silver. So take a look at those charts. Well, gold closed the week at 1266. That was up almost a percentage point. And silver blew past the $17 mark to 1731 at 1.7% increase. So the gold silver ratio dipped to 73.18 on the result of a higher silver closing, or higher gain in silver on a percentage basis than a higher gain in gold. Tweets of the week. Now, we're going to talk about this in a minute, but the Indian government is going to have this goods and services tax implemented. They're working out the amounts, and it basically covers 80 to 90% of all goods and services in India, and they're looking at probably a 4 or 5% tax on gold and silver. And Reuters doesn't miss an opportunity for a headline: India imports to plunge in festive months. Now, that's not necessarily true. They're saying, after people, what they're saying now is that Indians are buying gold in anticipation that this new tax is going to come in place, and then when the new tax comes in place, they're saying the demand will fall. However, Economic Times of India says gold demand may not be swayed by GST. So it's okay to speculate, but you see the Reuters headline, which disturbed me about it, is Indian gold imports to plunge. And then, of course, in the story, they wrote Indian gold imports could plunge, which is really what the headline should be, because you cannot definitively state what the impact of a tax is, and you shouldn't do it in a headline. For those of you interested in following, I'm not going to go through the ins and outs, but there's a GST timeline here. And just for your background information, currently there's a 10% import tax on gold, an excise tax of 1%, and a VAT of 1 to 1.5%. And that you would think would already curb gold demand. But we're not sure if they do the GST, what they might do with the import tax. So this is all a work in progress on what's happening in India. Now, silver, which had been kind of on the decline in demand for the last 18 months in India, it looks like it picked up a little bit in April to almost 600 tons, which is a decent amount. We'll see where that goes. As you know, on Smaulgld, we track the monthly Indian numbers. These are not unofficial numbers from Metal Focus. We will get the official numbers soon for April, and you can check them out on the Smaulgld site. There's a fiat currency. Inside joke there. Here is, so we mentioned, if you want to check it out, the clip I showed you on Trey Gowdy, the former CI director. Brennan, do you have evidence of Russian interference? He said, I don't do evidence. Chart of the week. Silver ETF demand is almost at all-time highs. It's really been ratcheting up the past couple of weeks. We've seen the closing of a lot of short positions, about half of them on the COMEX, and it looks like institutional investors are moving back into silver, as evidenced by the upswing you can see here slightly in SLV and in all. If you combine them all in all ETFs, you see that upswing over 600 million ounces of silver in ETFs. All right, so other news: China, Russia. They're going to build a wide-body jet. New challenge to Boeing Airbus. That'll be interesting to see that the two countries are working together, not just on economics and Russia selling oil and gold to China, but also now they're working on a wide-body jet. Some Fed chatter. Try not to pay much attention to it. Smaulgld subscriber sound off series is off to a blistering start. We've had 9 interviews so far. I've reproduced links here so you can check them out on YouTube. We had Carl talked about the bandwagon effect and the alternative financial media. We had Mark Battaglia talking about the 2 red pills and your awakening as to how things are, and then how things may be interpreted and how that interpretation might not be correct. So the people that brought you to the dance may not be the ones you want to stay with at the dance. Interesting interviews with both Carl and Mark. There's a story why the yuan won't be the world's reserve currency at zero hedge. And again, we've talked about that a lot, that people love China, or not people, but gold bugs tend to think China is some type of magical place because they import a lot of gold. They have a lot of gold, but you know what they have a lot more of? Credit. And Moody's, we'll see in a second, actually downgraded them because their debt is mounting at a significant rate. Here, Russia beats Saudi as top Chinese oil supplier for second month. So there's a lot of trade between Russia and China, and Russia's a resource country, basically. A lot of oil, a lot of gold, not a lot of much else, but they seem to be getting along. U.S. Mint sales. The Eagle sales picked up in the last week. I think they're over 2 million sold this month. The gold, not so much. The gold is only at 9,000, or as of this, I think there were 2 reports, but they weren't significant. This is the big one during the week. The U.S. Mint sold early in the week nearly 500,000 American Silver Eagles and only 3,500 Gold Eagles. If you're interested in buying gold or silver, you can do so through the Smaulgld site at the links below, and also on the website and through the banners. Smaulgld gets a small commission. That's how we pay for the site. So if you're interested in purchasing gold or silver, you can compare pricing and shipping. It's not an investment advice, but if you are going to do it, please consider doing it through the Smaulgld links. And these ATB coins, it looks like it's strange. They stopped selling the Frederick Douglass at 20,000, but they're continuing to sell the effigy mound. So the effigy mound sales are now higher, still very low compared to other coins, but they're about 24,000, 25,000. And looks like they're going to cap the Frederick Douglass at 20,000, making that the lowest mintage America the Beautiful coin. Also, you can donate to Smaulgld via PayPal. You can also do so via Patreon, become a patron, contribute a small monthly amount or a large monthly amount. And you can also pay a one-time or recurring subscription on PayPal. And there's your Bitcoin address there too. No one wants to give that up anymore. Here was another one we did on the Smaulgld subscribers sound off series. Kevin talked to us about the falsities in economic reporting. You want to check that one out as well. Housing data. Housing was existing home sales were not as high as they had expected, but home prices have been up. That's a recurring theme. The sales on the current housing recovery over the last 6-7 years have not been that robust. However, sales prices do continue to edge high, not edge higher, actually go higher at a very moderate pace. Here's a story I'm painting for gold in Oklahoma. We covered this last week. Arizona ends taxation on purchase and exchange of gold and silver coins. And Fidelity, the large investment company, is mining Bitcoin, and the CEO said she loves Bitcoin, she loves Ethereum. So interesting. Okay, here's the Moody's downgrade. China warns of fading, downgrades China warns of fading financial strength as debt mounts, and I write here, but China has gold, dollar collapse. So again, all of these countries, I don't care how much gold they have far more in credit, and they're far more interested in creating credit than they are in accumulating gold, possibly with the exception of Russia. Russia does not have that much debt, is close to a balanced budget, and is adding a lot of gold. China, you can forget. China can have all the gold in the world. It will never equal the amount of debt that they either currently have or eventually have. The world is awash in debt. Fed minutes. Now, here's one of the headlines. Fed forecasts a rate hike soon as they release their minutes, and details plan to trim balance sheet. Well, if you guys remember, they used to print and buy $80 billion a month, and they of mortgage-backed securities and U.S. treasuries, and they accumulated $4.5 trillion worth of this stuff. And now people thought when they were going to reduce their balance sheet, they would start to sell these assets, and people were worried, well, what's going to happen, who's going to buy them? Well, people that were worried about that were right. Yes, they can't do that. Well, they could do it, but it would have a big impact on interest rates. So here's what they're going to do. They're just going to allow these maturing securities to roll off. People don't realize that even though they stopped, maybe they do, that when they stopped QE, they continued with that large portfolio as the maturities, or as the securities matured. They would just reinvest the principal, and they'd buy more. So basically, the balance sheet continued to grow. Now what they're going to do is let them roll off. Well, maybe that'll be 10 billion a month. That'll take like half a century to reduce the balance sheet to zero. That's not a big deal. They have a $4.5 trillion balance sheet. Just letting these things roll off, 10 billion a month. What they'll probably do is they'll start that, and maybe they'll reduce it by 100 billion, 200 billion. They'll do it for a year or two. That just gives them room to kind of buy more, I suppose, thinking that it's normal to have a balance sheet of $4.5 trillion worth of stuff you bought with money printed out of thin air. Trade deficit increased again. Again, not looking good for the dollar when that happens. Initial claims continue to be low. April wholesale inventories minus 0.3%. Looks like the GDP forecast over 4% for the second quarter are being cut. I think the Atlanta Fed cut theirs, Goldman Sachs cut theirs, New York Fed. So they're probably now looking in the 2.5 to 3 range. And as the months go on, we'll see where the month goes on. We'll see where they start to reduce their second quarter GDP estimates too. Now, here's something interesting. Nano alloys for platinum 10 times as effective as pure platinum in fuel cells. This has an impact, again, on people who are thinking that silver and platinum and palladium are so rare, so valuable. They're used in all these industrial applications, and therefore the price has to skyrocket. Well, what people sometimes fail to recognize is that even if there's no substitution, there's nothing else you can substitute silver for. Well, you can. There's graphene, which doesn't cost anything. It's made out of carbon. But the manufacturers are learning ways to use less and less of the precious metals in the production of their products. Less silver required in solar panels now than 10 years ago. It's the same here. They make these nano alloys out of platinum. It still uses platinum, but it uses far less. So technology, even if you don't find more platinum, they find ways to make platinum more effective. U.S. Mint sales update, another 150,000 sold, but only 5 of American Eagles on this day, but only 500 American Gold Eagles. So American Silver Eagles at 2.155 month to date, and gold under 10,000. Very atrocious month for gold. A respectable month for silver. Nothing like the past months, but nothing like the more recent months where they were under a million. We also had Fernando Ortega on the most recent Smaulgld subscriber sound off series, and he talked about his views on silver in Mexico. This one was called Silver is a Throwaway Metal in Mexico. And then we also had on Friday durable goods were down, and here's the first. We also did have the first quarter second GDP reading. It actually is 1.2%. They expected it to dip below 1%. We'll get the final reading, I think, in a couple of weeks on the first quarter. Consumer confidence still strong. University of Michigan 97.1, lower than expected, but still higher. Here's the Atlanta Fed. They're now down to a 3.7% projection for the second quarter GDP. And as I mentioned, others are reducing their GDP estimates. And that about does it for the week. For this week's update. Thank you very much for listening. Remember to subscribe to Smaulgld and also to this channel. Thank you very much.